In a quiet little town surrounded by green hills and tall trees, there lived a family known for their kindness. The Thompsons were admired by everyone because they had opened their hearts and home to two children, Michael, who was white, and Elijah, who was black. Both boys were adopted, but while Michael was the biological son of Margaret and Robert, Elijah had joined the family later. From the outside, it seemed like the perfect household, a loving couple raising two sons together. But beneath the surface, things weren't as picture-perfect as they appeared. Elijah came into the Thompson family when he was just 7 years old. On the day he arrived, he felt both excited and nervous. He stepped into the large house with its shiny wooden floors and cozy furniture, clutching a small bag that held all his belongings. His new parents greeted him warmly, smiling and hugging him tightly. For a moment, Elijah thought this might be the beginning of a happy chapter in his life. But soon enough, reality set in. From the very start, Elijah noticed something strange. Everything seemed to revolve around Michael. Whether it was birthdays, school events, or even casual conversations at the dinner table, Michael always took center stage. At first, Elijah didn't think much of it. After all, Michael was older, taller, and more confident. Maybe, Elijah thought, it was natural for parents to focus more on their biological child. But as time went on, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. Michael got brand new toys every Christmas while Elijah received hand-me-downs or sometimes nothing at all. When summer camp season rolled around, Michael signed up without hesitation. But Elijah's name was never added to the list. Even meals felt different. Michael's plate was often filled with his favorite foods, while Elijah ate whatever was left over. It wasn't just about material things either. Simple gestures like hugs or words of encouragement seemed reserved only for Michael. Elijah began to feel invisible, like he didn't truly belong in the family he had hoped would become his own. School was another place where Elijah noticed the difference. Teachers quickly picked up on how quiet and withdrawn he was compared to other kids. In class, he rarely raised his hand, not because he didn't know the answers, but because he feared drawing attention to himself. During recess, he usually sat alone under a tree, flipping through books instead of playing games with the other children. Books became his escape, his safe haven from the loneliness that followed him everywhere. Despite feeling neglected at home, Elijah found joy in learning. He devoured novels, explored encyclopedias, and memorized poems. Reading transported him to worlds far away from his troubled reality. Through stories, he discovered heroes who overcame adversity, characters who faced hardships, yet emerged stronger. These tales gave him hope that maybe someday, his own story could have a happy ending too. But no matter how many books he read or how hard he tried to stay positive, the pain of being overlooked lingered. One evening, while sitting on the stairs, listening to Margaret praise Michael for scoring a goal in soccer, Elijah couldn't hold back his tears anymore. He ran to his room, buried his face in his pillow, and cried until he fell asleep. That night he dreamed of a place where he was loved and valued, not because of what he did, but simply because he existed. As Elijah grew older, the gap between him and Michael widened. By the time he turned 10, it was clear that the Thompsons treated their sons differently. Michael excelled in sports, earning trophies and medals that decorated the living room mantel. Margaret and Robert cheered loudly at his games, snapping photos and celebrating his victories as if they were national achievements. Meanwhile, Elijah's accomplishments went unnoticed. No one clapped when he aced a spelling test or wrote an award-winning essay. His report cards filled with straight A's were met with a quick glance and a dismissive "good job." This pattern continued year after year. In middle school, Michael became the star quarterback of the football team, attracting fans and admirers wherever he went. Elijah, on the other hand, joined the debate club. Though he won several competitions, his victories were barely acknowledged. Once, after winning first place in a regional competition, Elijah proudly showed his trophy to his parents. Margaret smiled politely and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning her attention back to Michael, who was showing off a new video game console. The lack of recognition stung, but what hurt even more was the silence. Elijah longed for someone, anyone, to tell him that he mattered. Instead, he learned to keep his feelings bottled up inside. He stopped sharing his successes with his family and kept his struggles to himself. Over time, he built walls around his heart, protecting himself from further disappointment. Despite the neglect, Elijah refused to give up. He poured all his energy into his studies, determined to prove his worth. His teachers recognized his potential and encouraged him to aim high. One day, during a parent-teacher conference, Elijah's English teacher raved about his exceptional writing skills. She suggested applying for a prestigious scholarship program designed for gifted students. Excited by the idea, Elijah rushed home to share the news with his parents. At dinner that night, he carefully explained the opportunity, emphasizing how it could open doors for his future. But instead of supporting him, Margaret and Robert exchanged skeptical glances. "It sounds like a lot of work," Robert finally said. "Besides, Michael already has plans for college. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin." Hurt and frustrated, Elijah retreated to his room, wondering why his dreams always came second to Michael's. Years passed, and Elijah entered high school. While Michael thrived socially, surrounded by friends and admirers, Elijah remained an outsider. He spent most of his free time reading and writing, using words to express the emotions he couldn't voice aloud. His journal became his closest companion, a place where he could pour out his frustrations, fears, and hopes. Through writing, Elijah began to understand that his value wasn't defined by his family's approval, or lack thereof. One evening, as he scribbled furiously in his notebook, Elijah realized something important. He deserved better. For so long, he had accepted the neglect as part of his life, believing he wasn't worthy of love or attention. But now, he saw the truth. He mattered. His voice mattered. And one day, he vowed, he would make sure the world knew it too. As Elijah entered his teenage years, the imbalance in the Thompson household became even more glaring. High school was supposed to be a time of growth and self-discovery, but for Elijah, it only highlighted the cracks in his family dynamic. While Michael basked in the spotlight, excelling in sports and social circles, Elijah continued to fade into the background. The neglect that had once been subtle now felt like an unshakable weight pressing down on him. Michael's life revolved around football. He was the star quarterback of the high school team, a role that earned him admiration from classmates and teachers alike. Every Friday night, the entire town gathered at the stadium to watch him play. Margaret and Robert never missed a game, cheering loudly from the stands with foam fingers and banners bearing Michael's name. After each victory, they threw parties at home, inviting friends and neighbors to celebrate their son's achievements. For Michael, life was a series of triumphs, each one amplified by the love and support of his family. Elijah, however, experienced a very different reality. Though he wasn't interested in sports, he joined the debate team, a decision that quickly proved to be a wise choice. His sharp mind and eloquent speeches made him a formidable competitor. Within months, he qualified for regional tournaments and began bringing home trophies. Yet these accomplishments barely registered with his parents. When Elijah proudly displayed his first-place medal from a statewide competition, Margaret simply nodded and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning her attention back to Michael, who was showing off a new pair of sneakers. The disparity between the two brothers grew more pronounced as time went on. Michael's successes were celebrated with grand gestures, family dinners, gifts, and public praise, while Elijah's victories were met with indifference. Even when he scored the highest grade in his class on a particularly challenging exam, no one acknowledged it. Instead, Robert casually remarked, "You should help Michael study sometime. His grades could use some improvement." This constant dismissal left Elijah feeling hollow. It wasn't just about the lack of recognition, it was the message behind it, that his efforts didn't matter, that he wasn't enough. He began to question whether he truly belonged in the Thompson family. Was he adopted out of genuine love, or was he merely an obligation? These thoughts haunted him late at night when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep. High school brought new challenges, not just academically, but socially as well. Michael thrived in his circle of friends, hosting sleepovers and attending weekend parties. He was the quintessential popular kid, confident and carefree. Elijah, on the other hand, struggled to connect with his peers. He preferred solitude over crowded hallways and noisy cafeterias. During lunch breaks, he often retreated to the library, where he could lose himself in books or work on essays for the school newspaper. Despite his introverted nature, Elijah wasn't entirely friendless. A few classmates noticed his intelligence and kindness and occasionally reached out to him. One of them was Sarah, a fellow member of the debate team. She admired Elijah's passion for justice and his ability to articulate complex ideas with clarity. Over time, the two formed a tentative friendship. Sarah would sit with Elijah during lunch, sharing stories about her own struggles with fitting in. Their conversations gave Elijah a sense of belonging he rarely experienced at home. But even Sarah couldn't fully understand the depth of Elijah's pain. How could she? To outsiders, the Thompsons appeared to be a loving, supportive family. No one suspected the emotional toll Elijah endured daily. He kept his feelings hidden, afraid of being judged or pitied. Writing became his outlet, a way to process his emotions without burdening others. Each entry in his journal was a raw, honest reflection of his inner turmoil. Through words, Elijah confronted the anger, sadness, and confusion that consumed him. One day, during a parent-teacher conference, Elijah's English teacher pulled Margaret and Robert aside. Ms. Harper, a kind yet firm woman in her 50s, had taken a special interest in Elijah. She recognized his talent and believed he had the potential to achieve great things. "Elijah is one of the most gifted writers I've ever taught," she told them earnestly. "I strongly recommend applying for the Young Scholars Program. It's highly competitive, but I think he has a real shot." Margaret listened politely but seemed distracted, glancing at her watch every few minutes. Robert frowned, clearly unimpressed. "That sounds like a lot of work," he said dismissively. "Besides, we're already focused on helping Michael prepare for college. We don't want to stretch ourselves too thin." Elijah, who had been waiting outside the classroom, heard every word. His heart sank as he realized his parents weren't willing to invest in his future. For years, he had hoped they would see his potential and encourage him to pursue his dreams. But now, standing there in the hallway, he understood the harsh truth. They didn't believe in him. Frustrated and hurt, Elijah decided to take matters into his own hands. That evening, he sat at his desk and began researching the scholarship program Ms. Harper had mentioned. The application process was rigorous, requiring essays, recommendation letters, and proof of academic excellence. Elijah knew it wouldn't be easy, especially without his parents' support, but he refused to let fear hold him back. This was his chance to prove that he was capable of greatness, even if no one else believed in him. Over the next several weeks, Elijah poured all his energy into the application. He spent countless hours drafting and revising essays, carefully choosing words that conveyed his passion and determination. When asked to describe a challenge he had overcome, Elijah wrote about the loneliness he had endured growing up in a family that favored his brother. It was painful to relive those memories, but it also gave him strength. By putting his struggles into words, he reclaimed a piece of himself. Sarah noticed how hard Elijah was working and offered to help. She proofread his essays, provided feedback, and encouraged him whenever he doubted himself. "You're going to get this scholarship," she told him confidently. "They'd be crazy not to choose you." Her belief in him meant more than she realized. It reminded Elijah that he wasn't entirely alone. As the deadline approached, Elijah completed his application with a mix of pride and apprehension. He mailed it off, hoping against hope that someone somewhere would recognize his worth. In the days that followed, he tried to distract himself by focusing on schoolwork and debate practice. But deep down, he couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at him. What if he didn't get selected? Would it confirm what his parents thought, that he wasn't good enough? Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. As Elijah walked home from school, he noticed a familiar car parked outside the house. It belonged to Ms. Harper, his English teacher. Curious, he hurried inside and found her sitting in the living room with Margaret and Robert. They looked serious, almost uncomfortable. Elijah, come here, Ms. Harper called, gesturing for him to join them. Her tone was gentle but firm. We need to talk. Elijah froze, unsure of what to expect. Had his parents finally decided to confront their neglect? Or worse, had they found out about the scholarship application and disapproved? Ms. Harper turned to Margaret and Robert, her expression stern. I came here today because I'm concerned about Elijah's future. He has incredible potential, but he needs your support. If you continue to overlook his talents, you'll be robbing him of opportunities he deserves. For a moment, silence filled the room. Elijah held his breath, waiting for his parents' response. Margaret looked away, guilt flickering across her face. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. Neither of them said anything. Though the conversation ended without resolution, it marked a turning point for Elijah. For the first time, someone had stood up for him, not just acknowledging his pain, but demanding action. It gave him hope that change was possible even if it wouldn't happen overnight. That night, as Elijah lay in bed, he replayed the day's events in his mind. He felt a strange mixture of emotions: anger at his parents for failing him, gratitude toward Ms. Harper for speaking up, and uncertainty about what the future held. But amidst the chaos, one thing was clear: he couldn't rely on anyone else to fight for him. From now on, Elijah vowed to take control of his destiny. He would build a life defined by his own terms, not the limitations imposed by others. Little did he know, the hardest battles were yet to come. But through resilience and courage, Elijah was determined to rise above the neglect that had shaped his past. The Thompson family had always been a pillar of strength in their small town, admired for their generosity and unity. But beneath the surface, cracks had formed over the years, cracks that would soon widen into chasms. Life continued its unpredictable course, and tragedy struck when Margaret, the matriarch of the family, passed away suddenly after a brief illness. Her death sent shockwaves through the household, leaving everyone reeling with grief. Margaret's funeral was a somber affair, attended by friends, neighbors, and relatives who came to pay their respects. The church was filled with soft whispers, sniffles, and the occasional sob as people mourned the loss of a woman many considered kind-hearted and selfless. Michael sat stoically beside his father, Robert, while Elijah lingered at the back of the room, feeling like an outsider even amidst shared sorrow. The tension within the family was palpable, though no one dared to voice it openly. During the service, the pastor delivered a heartfelt eulogy, speaking about Margaret's compassion and dedication to her community. As he concluded, he turned to the congregation and said, "Before we proceed, Margaret left something behind, a letter for each member of her family." He paused, holding up 3 sealed envelopes. She wanted these messages to be read today, as part of her final farewell. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone leaned forward, curious and moved by this personal touch. One by one, the pastor called out names. First, he handed an envelope to Robert, then another to Michael. Finally, he walked down the aisle toward Elijah, extending the 3rd envelope. Elijah hesitated before accepting it, his hands trembling slightly. Why would Margaret leave him a letter? She had rarely acknowledged him during her lifetime. Why, now? As the pastor returned to the pulpit, he instructed them to open the letters quietly. The room fell silent except for the rustling of paper. Elijah glanced around nervously, unsure what to expect. Slowly, he unfolded the neatly written note inside. It began with a simple greeting. "Dear Elijah." His breath caught in his throat as he continued reading. Margaret confessed that she had made countless mistakes in raising him. She admitted that she and Robert had favored Michael not out of love for their biological son, but because of societal pressures and their own insecurities. They had neglected Elijah, treating him as less important, and for that she expressed deep regret. "I failed you," Margaret wrote. "You deserved so much more than what we gave you. You are talented, intelligent, and full of potential, yet I let you feel invisible. Please forgive me." The letter went on to urge Elijah to share its contents with the rest of the family. insisting that the truth needed to come to light for healing to begin. Elijah's eyes blurred with tears as he absorbed every word. For years he had carried the weight of neglect alone, believing it was his fault, that somehow he wasn't worthy of love. Now, here was proof that the problem lay not with him, but with the people who were supposed to care for him. Relief washed over him, followed by anger, sadness, and finally determination. Margaret's apology was bittersweet. It came too late, but it also gave him permission to confront the pain he had buried for so long. After finishing the letter, Elijah looked up to find the pastor watching him expectantly. "Would you like to say a few words?" he asked gently. Elijah hesitated, his heart pounding. Sharing such private thoughts in front of a crowded church felt daunting, but he knew this was his moment to speak the truth. Taking a deep breath, he nodded and stood up. Walking to the podium, Elijah clutched the letter tightly in his hand. The room grew eerily quiet as all eyes turned to him. For a brief second, he felt paralyzed, unsure where to begin. Then, summoning every ounce of courage, he cleared his throat and started reading aloud. "Mom wrote this letter to me," he began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "She admitted that she and Dad treated me differently from Michael, not because they loved him more, but because they were afraid of judgment from others. She said she failed me, and she asked me to share this with our family." Elijah paused, glancing at Robert and Michael, who sat frozen in their seats. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with shock. No one had expected this revelation. Continuing, Elijah recounted Margaret's words, emphasizing how she acknowledged her guilt and pleaded for forgiveness. Each sentence hung heavy in the air, forcing those present to confront uncomfortable truths. When he reached the end of the letter, Elijah set it down and took a step closer to the microphone. His voice softened but remained firm. "I loved Mom too," he said, looking directly at his father and brother. "But I never felt loved back the way I deserved. I hope we can start healing now, for her sake." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, applause erupted from the congregation. People rose to their feet, clapping and nodding in support of Elijah's bravery. Some wiped away tears, moved by the raw honesty of his words. Even strangers approached him afterward, offering condolences and encouragement. For the first time in his life, Elijah felt truly seen and heard. Back at home later that evening, the atmosphere was tense. Robert sat slumped in his armchair, staring blankly at the floor. Michael paced nervously, running a hand through his hair. Elijah stood near the doorway, clutching the letter in his hand. The weight of what had transpired earlier still lingered in the air, pressing down on everyone. Finally, Robert broke the silence. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice cracking. "Your mom was right. We messed up. We treated you unfairly, Elijah, and I'm sorry." Elijah blinked, surprised by the apology. Part of him wanted to lash out, to unleash years of pent-up frustration and pain. But instead, he simply nodded. "It's a start," he replied, his tone measured. "But actions matter more than words." Michael stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "I didn't realize how bad things were for you," he said quietly. "I guess I was too focused on myself to notice. I'm sorry, Elijah. I should have been there for you." Though skeptical, Elijah appreciated the effort. "Thanks," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Trust wouldn't come easily, but this was a beginning, a chance to rebuild fractured relationships. In the days that followed, the Thompson household underwent subtle changes. Robert made an effort to spend more time with Elijah, asking about his interests and listening to his opinions. Though awkward at first, their conversations gradually became more natural. Michael also tried to mend fences, inviting Elijah to join him for meals or casual hangouts. While Elijah remained cautious, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could improve. Meanwhile, Elijah received news that changed everything. He had been awarded the prestigious scholarship Ms. Harper had encouraged him to apply for. The announcement came as both a relief and a triumph. All those late nights spent drafting essays and revising applications had paid off. This achievement wasn't just a ticket to college, it was validation of his worth, a reminder that he was capable of greatness despite the obstacles stacked against him. When Elijah shared the news with his family, Robert and Michael reacted with genuine excitement. For the first time, they celebrated his success without reservation. Robert hugged him tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I'm proud of you, son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Michael grinned, giving Elijah a playful punch on the shoulder. "Looks like you're going places," he teased, though his smile was sincere. Elijah couldn't help but smile back. Though the road ahead would be challenging, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Margaret's letter had sparked a chain reaction of healing and accountability, and though she was no longer physically present, her words lived on, guiding the family toward a brighter future. As Elijah prepared to leave for college, he reflected on how far he had come. From feeling invisible and unwanted to standing tall and confident, his journey had been anything but easy. Yet, through resilience and courage, he had reclaimed his identity and proven that he was more than the sum of his circumstances. The scars of neglect would always remain, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of his strength and perseverance. And somewhere Margaret watched proudly, knowing her secret letter had ignited a transformation that would last a lifetime. The days following Margaret's funeral were unlike any the Thompson family had experienced before. For years they had lived in a fragile bubble of denial, pretending that everything was fine despite the glaring cracks in their relationships. But Elijah's decision to read his adoptive mother's letter aloud shattered that illusion once and for all. The truth was out, raw and unfiltered, forcing everyone to confront the pain they had ignored for far too long. Elijah woke up the morning after the funeral, feeling both drained and strangely lighter. It was as if a weight he had carried for years had finally been lifted, or at least acknowledged. He sat by the window in his room, watching the sun rise over the hills, its golden rays painting streaks across the sky. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where he wasn't defined by neglect or rejection. Downstairs, Robert shuffled into the kitchen, looking haggard and exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually tidy appearance was replaced by rumpled clothes and unkempt hair. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sank into a chair at the dining table. When Elijah entered the room, Robert looked up, guilt etched across his face. "Can we talk?" he asked hesitantly. Elijah nodded, pulling out a chair opposite his father. Though wary, he sensed this conversation was important, not just for Robert but for both of them. "I've done a lot of thinking," Robert began, his voice trembling. "Your mom, she was right about everything. We failed you, Elijah. I failed you, and I don't know how to fix it." For a moment, Elijah didn't respond. He studied his father's face, searching for sincerity behind the words. Could he trust him? After years of being overlooked and dismissed, forgiveness wouldn't come easily. But something in Robert's tone, a mix of vulnerability and regret, made Elijah soften slightly. "It's not going to be fixed overnight," he said finally. "But maybe we can start by actually listening to each other." Robert nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I want to try," he whispered. "I owe you that much." Over the next few days, father and son began having awkward yet meaningful conversations. At first, they tiptoed around sensitive topics, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But slowly they opened up, sharing stories and memories Elijah hadn't realized mattered so much to Robert. They talked about Margaret, her quirks, and the pressures she faced trying to balance two sons with vastly different needs. Through these discussions, Elijah gained a deeper understanding of his parents' flaws and humanity. Forgiveness remained a distant goal, but reconciliation felt possible. Michael, on the other hand, struggled more openly with guilt. Unlike Robert, who bore the burden of leadership and responsibility, Michael had always been sheltered from the harsh realities of family dynamics. Growing up, he had taken his privileged position for granted, oblivious to the pain his brother endured. Now, confronted with the truth, he felt overwhelmed by shame and confusion. One evening, as Elijah packed boxes for college, Michael knocked on his bedroom door. "Hey, can I come in?" he asked tentatively. Elijah gestured for him to sit, curious about what his brother wanted to say. Michael fidgeted nervously, avoiding eye contact. I wanted to apologize," he stammered. "I didn't realize how bad things were for you. I should have noticed, but I was too focused on myself." Elijah sighed, leaning back against the wall. "It's not your fault entirely," he admitted. "You didn't create the situation, but yeah, you could have been more aware." His tone wasn't accusatory, just honest. Michael winced but nodded, accepting the critique. "I want to make it right," Michael continued. "I know I can't change the past, but maybe we can start fresh? Be better brothers?" Though skeptical, Elijah appreciated the effort. "Okay," he replied simply. "We'll see." From that day forward, Michael made small but significant changes. He stopped hogging the spotlight during family gatherings, giving Elijah space to share his achievements. When friends visited, he introduced Elijah proudly, highlighting his accomplishments instead of overshadowing them. These gestures might have seemed minor to outsiders, but for Elijah, they signaled a shift, a willingness to acknowledge and respect his presence. As Elijah prepared to leave for college, excitement mingled with apprehension. On one hand, he was thrilled to embark on a new chapter of his life, free from the constraints of his childhood home. On the other hand, he worried about leaving behind the fragile progress he and his family had made. Would they continue working toward healing, or would old habits resurface once he was gone? To his surprise, Robert and Michael threw him a small farewell party the night before his departure. It wasn't extravagant, just pizza, cake, and heartfelt speeches. But it meant the world to Elijah. For the first time, he felt celebrated rather than sidelined. As Michael raised his glass in a toast, his voice cracked with emotion. "To Elijah," he said, smiling through tears. "You're amazing, bro. Don't forget that." Elijah smiled back, genuinely touched. "Thanks, Mike," he replied softly. In that moment, he realized that while their relationship still had work to do, the foundation for something stronger was forming. College proved to be everything Elijah had dreamed of and more. Surrounded by peers who shared his passion for learning, he thrived academically and socially. His professors praised his essays, calling them insightful and thought-provoking. Classmates admired his quiet confidence and sought his advice on group projects. Slowly but surely, Elijah began to believe in himself, not because others told him to, but because he knew deep down that he deserved it. Yet even as he flourished, Elijah kept his connection to home alive. Every weekend, he called Robert and Michael, updating them on his classes and campus activities. To his delight, they listened intently, asking questions and offering encouragement. Robert mailed care packages filled with snacks and handwritten notes, while Michael sent funny memes to keep Elijah entertained during stressful weeks. These acts of kindness reminded Elijah that despite their rocky history, his family cared about him in their own imperfect way. One semester, Elijah took a creative writing course that challenged him to explore personal themes in his work. Inspired by Margaret's letter and the journey he had undertaken since reading it, he penned an essay titled, "Invisible No More." The piece chronicled his experiences growing up neglected and how confronting the truth had set him free. When he submitted it for publication in the university literary magazine, he never expected the response it would receive. The essay became a sensation, sparking conversations among students and faculty alike. Readers praised its honesty and emotional depth, describing it as a powerful reminder of resilience and self-worth. Encouraged by the feedback, Elijah decided to expand the essay into a memoir, weaving together stories from his childhood, adolescence, and newfound independence. Writing the book was cathartic, allowing him to process lingering emotions and celebrate his growth. Years later, Elijah returned to his hometown as a published author. His memoir, Invisible No More, had become a bestseller, touching countless lives with its message of hope and redemption. Standing on stage during a local book signing event, Elijah scanned the crowd, recognizing familiar faces among the attendees. There was Sarah, his high school friend, Ms. Harper, his former English teacher, and of course Robert and Michael, beaming with pride. As he spoke to the audience about his journey, Elijah reflected on how far he had come. From feeling invisible and unwanted to standing tall and confident, his transformation had been anything but easy. Yet through courage and perseverance, he had reclaimed his identity and proven that he was more than the sum of his circumstances. The scars of neglect would always remain, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of his strength and resilience. And somewhere Margaret watched proudly, knowing her secret letter had sparked a chain reaction of healing and accountability. Her apology may have come too late, but its impact would last a lifetime. Years had passed since Elijah left for college, and the Thompson family had undergone profound changes. What began as a fractured household struggling to confront its mistakes evolved into something stronger, though not without effort. For Elijah, returning home felt surreal. The town hadn't changed much. The same rolling hills stretched out beyond the horizon, and the streets still carried memories of his childhood. But the people within those familiar places were different, especially his father and brother. Elijah's memoir, Invisible No More, became a beacon of hope for many who had faced neglect or injustice in their own lives. Its success brought him recognition far beyond what he had imagined. Invitations poured in from schools, community centers, and conferences asking him to speak about resilience, forgiveness, and finding one's voice. Though flattered, Elijah remained grounded. He understood that his journey wasn't unique. It was simply one story among countless others waiting to be told. Still, sharing his experiences gave him purpose, knowing it might inspire someone else to rise above their struggles. Back in his hometown, Elijah's presence sparked a renewed sense of pride among neighbors and friends. Many approached him after his book signing event, expressing gratitude for putting words to emotions they couldn't articulate themselves. One elderly woman hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You reminded me of my own son," she whispered. "I wish I'd done better by him." Another man shook Elijah's hand, saying, "Your story made me realize I need to reconnect with my sister. We haven't spoken in years." These interactions reinforced Elijah's belief that healing starts with honesty. By confronting the pain of his past, he had created space for growth, not just for himself, but for others too. At home, Robert and Michael continued working to rebuild their relationship with Elijah. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Old habits sometimes resurfaced, and there were moments when frustration threatened to undo their progress. But they persisted, determined to honor Margaret's memory by becoming the family she had hoped for. Robert, now retired, spent more time reflecting on his life choices. He joined a local support group for fathers seeking guidance in repairing strained relationships with their children. Through these meetings, he learned valuable lessons about communication, empathy, and accountability. Each week, he shared updates with Elijah during their phone calls, eager to demonstrate his commitment to change. "I'm trying, son," he often said. "It's not easy, but I owe it to you and to your mom to do better." Michael also matured significantly. Once consumed by sports and social status, he now prioritized meaningful connections over superficial achievements. After graduating from college, he moved back to their hometown and took a job coaching high school football. Inspired by Elijah's courage, he encouraged his players to embrace vulnerability and teamwork. "Winning isn't everything," he told them during practice sessions. "Being there for each other, that's what matters most." When Elijah visited, Michael proudly introduced him to the team, emphasizing how much his brother's journey had influenced him. "This guy is tougher than any athlete I know," Michael joked, clapping Elijah on the shoulder. The gesture might have seemed small, but to Elijah, it symbolized a monumental shift in their bond. Despite the strides they had made, Elijah knew trust wouldn't fully heal overnight. There were still lingering wounds, moments when old insecurities crept back in. But he chose to focus on the positives. Every heartfelt conversation, every act of kindness, brought them closer to reconciliation. And while he cherished his independence, Elijah found comfort in knowing he had a family rooting for him now. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elijah sat with Robert and Michael on the porch of their childhood home. Fireflies danced in the twilight, casting soft glows across the yard. The three of them sipped lemonade, reminiscing about Margaret and laughing at old memories. For the first time, Elijah felt truly at peace. "You've come so far," Robert said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I'm proud of you, Elijah, truly." Elijah smiled, meeting his father's gaze. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." Michael chimed in, grinning mischievously. "Yeah, bro. You're basically famous now. Maybe you'll write a sequel next. Something like the No Longer Invisible, the sequel." They all laughed, the sound echoing through the quiet night. In that moment, Elijah realized how far they had come, not just individually, but as a family. They weren't perfect, and they never would be. But perfection wasn't the goal. Healing was. As the months turned into years, Elijah's career flourished. His memoir led to speaking engagements across the country, where he inspired audiences with stories of resilience and self-discovery. Schools invited him to mentor students, encouraging them to use writing as a tool for processing emotions. Teachers praised his ability to connect with young people, noting how his authenticity resonated deeply with them. But even amid his professional success, Elijah stayed connected to his roots. He returned to his hometown regularly, checking in on Robert and Michael. Together, they celebrated milestones, birthdays, holidays, and even ordinary days that held special meaning. These visits reminded Elijah of the importance of family, no matter how imperfect it might be. One crisp autumn morning, Elijah received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Ms. Harper, his former English teacher. She wrote to thank him for inspiring her current students, many of whom had read his memoir as part of their curriculum. "Your story has given them courage to speak up and believe in themselves," she wrote. "Thank you for proving that words have power, and that they can change lives." Tears welled up in Elijah's eyes as he read her note. He thought back to the countless hours he had spent in her classroom, pouring his heart into essays and assignments. At the time, he hadn't realized how much those early efforts would shape his future. Now, looking at the impact of his work, he felt immense gratitude, not just for Ms. Harper but for everyone who had supported him along the way. Margaret's influence lingered long after her passing. Her secret letter had been the catalyst for transformation, forcing the Thompsons to confront uncomfortable truths and strive for redemption. Though she wasn't physically present to witness the changes, her love and wisdom guided them through the darkest times. Elijah often imagined her watching from afar, smiling as she saw her family grow stronger together. On the anniversary of her death, Elijah, Robert, and Michael visited her grave. They stood silently for a while, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, Elijah knelt down and placed a single flower on her headstone. "We're doing okay, Mom," he said softly. "Thanks to you." Robert and Michael nodded, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Together, they walked back to the car, united by shared memories and newfound understanding. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they faced it side by side, stronger, wiser, and more hopeful than ever before. And so, Elijah's story came full circle. From a boy who once felt invisible to a man whose voice reached thousands, he proved that resilience could overcome neglect, that forgiveness could mend broken bonds, and that love, even in its flawed forms, could endure. Somewhere, Margaret watched proudly, knowing her secret letter had ignited a legacy of healing and hope that would last generations.